Hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Make the News, a new experiment here on HAPS, where we talk with journalists and others about the headlines. So we have with us today a very cool group, many familiar faces here from the HAPS community in particular. Hey, Carrie, good morning from Los Angeles. Great to see you here. Awesome to see Robert dropping in. Thanks for joining us. This is something that we don't have Pablo for, so I'm really just going to try to slog through this one here solo. But thankfully, I have help, and I will bring onto screen some colleagues here. Please allow me to introduce the crew who has showed up to help out in today's experiment in the news. Some familiar faces. So first of all, to my upper right here, Peter Stern from Stern Look, the weekly show on HAPS that delves deep into the reporting process and kind of the inner workings of journalism. Peter, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me. I have to say, Peter, weekly is a bit ambitious. It's more like every 2 or 3 weeks in the past month or so, just because of difficulty in getting guests to come on the show. You know, what I really like to do with Stern Look is to bring in journalists who have never worked with HAPS before and kind of bring them in, introduce them to the community, and have them explain what they do. But that's been difficult over the past month or so.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot going on with the transition that everyone's staying busy with in your journalist networks. Well, thanks for being here, Peter. Also with us, of course, Alex Mohajer, the Daily Show star of the AM Report. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I caught some of your show earlier. You're approaching 1 million views, sir. Alex, original gangster here. Thanks for being here, bud.
Good to see you, Peter, of course. Hey, Peter, Peter squared. Good to see you guys. I know, I love that you think that once every week is ambitious. Try doing it every morning without a cup of coffee. Oy.
Man, you do it pre-coffee? Is that even possible?
I do it mid-coffee.
Mid-coffee?
Yeah, I do it. I drink my coffee and then I start the stream and try to inject it into my blood as quickly as possible.
Yeah, you're awake by the end of the episode. I get
it.
Yes,
by the end, I'm awake, without fail. By the end.
That's awesome. Thanks for being here. And also with us, a friend of HAPS, Douglas Caballero. Douglas, thank you so much for being here. Douglas has really been the on-camera talent of many a production, has worked with Current TV, and also done some incredible live interviews with very notable guests at South by Southwest. Douglas, thank you for joining us today. Welcome to HAPS.
It's good to be here. It's exciting to be on. I have to admit, I'm a little ashamed. This is my first broadcast on HAPS, but I actually was there for the inception of the company when it was on a whiteboard. So I'm excited to be here.
That's amazing. That's really fascinating. Would love to hear a little bit more about that. Some of the early days of HAPS. I'm sure our viewers would too. My first kind of topic of discussion I wanted to bring up was just how each of you kind of got started in media respectively. And we can kind of do this roundtable style, I guess, popcorn. Maybe I'll start with Peter since you're up here on top. Peter's on top today, but tell us how you got going in journalism. What drew you to it?
Sure. So after I graduated from college, I had done a few internships at different newsrooms, and then I worked at Politico for a few years in New York. And while I was at Politico, I wasn't so much covering politics news as I was covering news about the media industry. It was very meta. I was what they call a media reporter. So I got to know a lot about the industry that I was both covering and in. I wrote a lot about the move from print publications to digital publications, about ad tech, about all the new digital platforms. And then when Trump started running for president, I wrote about the intersection of media and politics and his sort of criticism and attacks on the press. After Trump was elected, I left Politico and went to Freedom of the Press Foundation, where I worked on the US Press Freedom Tracker project, which was a project to document attacks against journalists and violations of journalist rights in the United States. So we had a website, pressfreedomtracker.us, that would track and document every instance of a journalist being physically attacked in the US, or arrested while covering protests, or forced to testify and reveal their confidential sources in court, and those kinds of things. So first I was in media, in journalism, and then I moved to kind of the nonprofit world, still writing about journalists and about the threats that journalists face in the US.
That's great. And now you are back again here in, I guess, the freelance world, right? With New York Magazine primarily. Is that correct?
Yeah. So since leaving Freedom of the Press Foundation, I've kind of gotten back into writing and doing reporting, primarily for New York Magazine and also a bit for the Columbia Journalism Review, just kind of writing about the media industry. And then, of course, I also started hosting this, let's say, occasional show on HAPS, Stern Look, which is my attempt to bring journalists and introduce them to the audience here on HAPS so that they can explain what they cover, how they do journalism, and the role that they see journalism playing in politics and in society. So I'm really focused on journalists who are covering topics that a lot of people might not know about, or that they might think they know about, such as the immigration debate or climate change, and having them explain what it is they actually do and what they wish that other journalists, and especially the general public, knew about their beats.
That's awesome. Super important, to see how the sausage is made, so to speak. And yeah, love the work you're doing with Stern Look. Alex, how did you get started in media here with your daily show? What inspired you to take this on?
Well, I think my introduction to journalism and just working in the media is pretty unconventional. I wrote for the Daily Cal at UC Berkeley, where we're both grads. Go Bears! And,
really? Oh wow!
Yeah.
I don't know if I knew that. That's cool.
I'm much older than you, Peter, but that's where I
never know.
started. Yeah. Well. Thanks. I'll take it as a compliment. So I started writing there, but I went to law school, and I've been involved as an activist and a political organizer. And in 2016, during the presidential campaign, I was working heavily in the activist space. I was organizing for a presidential candidate at the time who did not end up president. Let's just put it that way. And that was a very unique election cycle, because I could see how there was like a confluence of social media being a new conduit for critiquing what was going on, and yet was also a conduit for misinformation at a alarming level. So the work I was doing for that campaign got the attention of the Huffington Post, and I started as a contributor there after they wrote a feature on my work for that campaign. And then the editor who wrote the feature was like, "Hey, I noticed some of your blogs and stuff that you've been writing for the campaign. You interested in contributing to the platform?" At the time, the HuffPost did a contributorship. And I did. I started writing criticisms of the Trump administration, the Trump campaign, and also critiquing the media's failure to critique the Trump campaign and Trump administration in a way that was salient. And that got a big following. And I continued doing that for a couple of years, and that just kind of continued to snowball. And then I freelanced for USA Today. I've done some other work for other publications. And then about 6 months ago, you guys, I think it was Lucia, recruited me to come over to HAPS.
Lucia's in the house.
What's up, Lucia? And I tiptoed into this space and kind of took on a new chapter of what's already been a pretty unconventional track for me in terms of my work in the media.
Yeah, fascinating how you made that transition from advocacy campaigning into being a voice, giving your own take and analysis, and very cool to see. Great to have you here, Douglas. You're up, man. How'd you get going with hosting?
Yeah, I apologize for any noise in the background. I have a cattle dog puppy who's with his sitter right now, and they're very smart dogs, and he's very active. So I apologize for the noise. I got into media. I grew up in Austin, Texas. Before Austin was Austin, and I had a blues radio show when I was a teenager. I was obsessed with media and music and talking about media, sort of meta, as Peter said. And I ended up moving around to New York and then to the Bay Area. And I got my MBA. I started to focus on information law and how it pertained mostly to media. And then when I moved down to Los Angeles, which is where I am now, I worked for a studio, and I did not like working for a studio, realized it wasn't for me. I wanted to be more in the cutting edge space of media and entertainment. And through some moves of my own and a lot of serendipitous luck, I ended up meeting a future collaborator of mine, who then introduced me to Current TV, and David Newman, who's one of the co-founders of HAPS, and Al Gore. And along the way, I also started talking to MTV News, which was still a thing back then. I actually have the most incredible DVD of my audition interview with the great Kurt Loder. I was being courted to become one of the faces of MTV News. And at the same time, Current TV was much more cutting edge in my mind, and there was a lot more opportunity to be innovative. And so I decided to go with Al Gore's startup network and David Newman, and ended up building a music programming department at Current TV. I'm a music guy, but I'm more than anything, I'm a deep dive interviewer. I ended up doing music for a few years for Current TV, and that's really where I learned how to produce, how to direct, how to interview, and to be a journalist. And along the way, I got to do a lot of really interesting things. They gave me a really long leash, if any leash at all, and I got to do some great things like bring Adele to America for her first television interview. No one knew who she was at that point in the US. I did the same thing with an artist named Calvin Harris. He back then was very, I should say, nerdy, bad hair, not the Calvin Harris you see on billboards today. Same with him. Diplo, same with him, and so on and so forth.
Nerdy, bad hair, same, or what do you mean by same? Let's clarify.
Calvin Harris?
No, I was just wondering, when you said same, if you're also talking about the lack of refined style that they're so iconic for today.
Oh, well, I mean, one of the things that I got to do, which I was very fortunate, is that Current TV gave me a lot of leash. And not only did I get to go and choose what would then go on to be some of the most important artists of our generation at the time, no one knew who they were. I also got to work out how I was going to tell their story in unique and different ways. Rock journalism for me was a little boring. Just interviewing someone about their sound or their inspiration, to me, is honestly a little boring. These people are, they're creators, they are innovators. Like, how else can we use them to, help us learn about the world? And so that's what I got to also experiment with as far as formatting when I was much younger, and I was working for Al Gore. And along the way, 2008 happened, and a very exciting candidate named Barack Obama ran for president, and a lot of creatives and a lot of artists got behind him. And so I was able to tap into that, and I started to cover civics through the lens of pop culture, through artists of all types, from Shepard Fairey to the Black Eyed Peas, doing unusual and unique things with them. To Rage Against the Machine, I've been with them at the RNC, and I was watching Shepard Fairey get arrested at the DNC, and getting to cover civics through that lens. And that's what really inspired me to want to pursue things and cover other stories beyond just music, but use pop culture as that lens, as that hook to get an audience involved with the storyline. And from there, I've just moved on to other, more digital leaning places, from the Young Turks to back when Vivo was something, and did some work with Snapchat at one point. And currently, one of the things that, yes, I've done a lot of content strategy and interviewing for South by Southwest. I've interviewed everyone from presidents of countries to Michael Pollan talking about psychedelics to futurists Ray Kurzweil and so on. And then now what I do is I do a lot of content strategy for a company that it's called C3 Presents. They own a bunch of music festivals. They own 8 Lollapaloozas, several Austin City Limits festivals, as well as Bonnaroo and about 30 other festivals around the world, and manage about 65 artists. So it's my job to figure out how we can use all of those interesting components to make compelling content and stories and tell stories about everything under the sun, from sex and relationships to fashion to civics, drugs, etc. Whether they be long form or short form, scripted and unscripted. So that's a lot of what I do right now. So I'm kind of, I do some of this right now, and then I also do a lot of the concepting, architecting behind the scenes as well.
That's super interesting. Wow. Such, fascinating different avenues into media. I guess I've never shared mine, I don't think, with our community even. So my path to journalism and visual storytelling is definitely roundabout. I originally got into it through travel. Originally, I was actually teaching English in Mongolia. I had the travel bug after undergrad, where I studied international politics and economics, and went overseas and started a blog to share some of my experiences as an English teacher in Mongolia through the Fulbright program with some of my friends and family back home, and started to take photos to put in those blogs. Before that, my parents, couldn't get me to take photos when I was at school away, or I was never social media centric at all, or really visual thinking. And so that really was all started when I went overseas for the first time. For the first time in an extended, adult living situation. And I thought, wow, there's so much interesting things going on here culturally. The natural landscapes in Mongolia are beautiful. The Buddhist temples and the incredible, nomadic lifestyle and all of that just really inspired me to start documenting this entire, experience I was having and chronicling it. And I created a photo book and realized I really wanted to study how to, curate a better visual experience in video. So I went and applied to UC Berkeley's grad school of journalism. I was living in California at the time after coming back from Mongolia, and studied a mixture of things from short form documentary filmmaking to photography and photojournalism, web design, that sort of stuff. Interesting mixture. And then went back to Mongolia and started making short films for the South China Morning Post, for CNN, for Bloomberg, for anyone who wanted a video story from Mongolia. I was there working with a lot of local journalists and producers to cover some really interesting stories, ranging from climate change in the remote glacial regions and that impact on local nomadic life, as well as things like rugby taking off in this culture where the traditional sports of wrestling and horseback riding and kind of this manly trope that people really hyper masculine associate with Mongolia, and how that's translating into this huge frenzy around rugby. So things from sports to environment to religion and all sorts of interesting things. But that's how I got into journalism and video storytelling and documentary filmmaking. And I came back from that to teach drone videography at UC Berkeley when the pandemic happened. And then I was basically shut out of returning to Mongolia, where I was kind of building a life as a doc filmmaker. I actually had a TV show in Mongolia too. I had a national TV show in Mongolia where I was practicing, these sort of interviews, not quite the level of Douglas's or Peter's or Alex's perhaps, but, lots of local notable celebs, some international models, some CEOs. I really, had an interesting experience being a big name in a really, small market, and getting that experience to just, get a trial run into this whole hosting format, and it was wonderful. And now thanks to Pablo, he pulled me into HAPS when I was here, and the door shut to go back to Mongolia, and this was just too good of an opportunity to pass up. So that's kind of how I ended up here at HAPS. It's a long story, and guys, I'm sorry for stealing the limelight from the guests on screen here, but I realized I had never actually shared that with some of the community yet.
The truth shall set you free.
The truth shall set you free.
That's fascinating. I actually am amazed. I actually think about you, Peter, every so often. I have a television that can set to images of art, and I found these Mongolian horse riders that you can set the TV to as its kind of like screensaver. And I thought of you because I did know about you being in Mongolia, and it almost looks like the American West, but when you look closer, you realize they're Mongolian horse riders. It's beautiful. It's beautiful.
Yeah, totally. No, I'm still very much in love with Mongolia, and try to get back there once things open up again. That's for sure. But
it's funny because that's literally I've been daydreaming about traveling after the pandemic's over, and I have a case of the wanderlust. Before the pandemic, I'm a backpacker. I like to go backpack, and the number one place I want to go Mongolia, and then travel over to Cambodia, Thailand, and do that entire region.
Yeah,
so, I'm jelly.
It's fascinating. I can only picture you doing that in your full suit with, your earpiece and all of that, with the cameras going.
It's the magic of television. You guys know I'm party on the top, or I'm business on the top and party on the bottom. I wear like sweat shorts on the bottom. I wear like my boxer briefs when I do my morning stream every day, sometimes pajamas. But from here up, I look like I'm in studio. That's all that matters.
That's so funny. Yeah, well, you can fool us. I remember, was it a CNN or CBS reporter who got caught literally pantsless on TV while doing a spot at home in the early days of quarantine? Do you guys remember that?
Yes. Peter, I'm just going to call you the news mullet. You're the visual representation of a mullet. You're all, business in the front, party in the back.
There you go.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. Yes, good analogy. So guys, I'm curious, we're here to talk headlines a bit too. Just full disclosure, HAPS is not advocating for any political party or perspective here. We invite you all to come up and start your own discussions and dialogues about the headlines. We have some cool features here. We can go and look at some of the coverage of, the big news this week of the American Rescue Plan, which is going to be, historic in many ways and impact U.S. And many Americans for a long time to come. But I think, one thing that maybe I will ask each of you is, what is your immediate reaction to this plan? And I'm going to throw up in screen share. That sounds wrong, but I'm going to put up on screen a screen share of some various headlines from different publications and see kind of what their take is on this plan. But this is, hugely important in many ways, and would love to hear the diversity of opinions in the comments as well on this. So we value your perspective. So feel free to chime in, and I will start. Peter, what's your take?
Yeah, I think that, it's a good thing. I'm glad that people are getting money because so many people are out of work during the pandemic. There's a reason that you had increased unemployment benefits last year, why you had stimulus payments last year. And right now it looks like we could be getting to the end of the pandemic. The vaccination rollout is going very well. But in the meantime, there are still so many people who are out of work. So I think it is good that, there are going to be more stimulus payments. And I don't think I'm alone in feeling that way. One thing that is striking about this bill is that it is widely supported by people in the US, even though no Republicans ultimately voted for it, Republican politicians. Half of Republicans who were polled in the US support the bill, and obviously lots of Democrats and independents support the bill. So it's interesting that even though this is seen as, politically controversial, among the American people, most people seem to support it. So while it might be controversial kind of within Washington, D.C. and within, political publications, like, oh, this is something that Republicans don't like, but Democrats do like, if you look at the benefits that it has for people and how ordinary people feel about it, it isn't that controversial a bill. So that's why I'm very interested to see, you want to talk about what the different headlines are and the way that they present this bill. And certainly, I think conservative publications will present it differently than more liberal or leftist publications. But in general, I feel like this isn't a very controversial political issue, despite the fact that it has been politicized. It's not like something like the other big bill that was discussed this week and will continue to be is the PRO Act, the very pro-union act. That is something that people across the political spectrum disagree a lot about. People on the left and liberals tend to support it, while Republicans, businesses, the Chamber of Commerce are very opposed to it. But I don't think you see that same kind of polarization around the American Rescue Plan.
I don't think anyone's going to turn down free money. I mean, this is where the rubber meets the road. I personally am affected by this. Like, I can see it immediately as I'm looking through the bullet points of it. My closest friend is a business owner, brick and mortar business owner, who has 3 children. She, right off the bat is going to be, being assisted in more ways than one. I'm a first-time homeowner as of last year. I will be affected by it. I also have student loans from my graduate school days. I will be affected by this. There are things in there where I just don't see how anyone's going to want to turn down free money because of their political leanings one way or the other. And I think it's not too late. I think this is an exciting thing to happen for America right now.
It's more than just free money. This is a generational transformation of our economy, and the impact that it's going to have. I think it has broad bipartisan support amongst voters, and there's a reason that the right-wing media, basically the conservative media class and the Republican political establishment oppose it, is because it's a victory for the Democratic president. It's bad faith opposition. It offers child care tax credits to people. It subsidizes health care. If you've got a mortgage, rental assistance, food insecurity, the direct payments is just one element of it. The $1,400 direct payments, the extension of unemployment benefits for people. I think the most aid for Black farmers since the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. It's a very, very the breadth of the bill is profound, and it's a huge legislative victory for the president. The biggest takeaway here is that elections have consequences, and those 2 Senate races in Georgia, you're welcome. It wouldn't have happened if we hadn't won those 2 Senate races in Georgia. It just wouldn't have happened. It wouldn't have happened if we hadn't elected Joe Biden president. We'd still be languishing under a Trump administration's fecklessness and inability to really move on anything, on the economy, on the vaccine distribution, on any of it. So elections have consequences, and it's major movement. And I think it's a big win for the American people.
Yeah, it's interesting. One thing that I'm seeing in the comments is, we can't afford this. The money's being given away is ours. And, we basically will be footing the bill for generations here. This is something that I'm concerned about as well. And, I know everyone has their perspective here. I just want to acknowledge those and read these in the comments. So,
hold on, Peter. The Republican Party lined up to vote for a $1.9 trillion tax cut for the wealthy and for corporations in 2017. But when that aid is going to come to people, to the American people, to everyday Americans, all of a sudden people are concerned about the bill. They're concerned about the cost. Where was the concern about the cost when you were giving free money away to the rich? and to tax unnecessary tax cuts for the wealthy and for corporations. Where's your outrage when Amazon pays 0% in a income tax last year, while I pay something like 30% after all is said and done? The outrage is misplaced. This aid is going to be good for the economy. If you're worried about where the government has run up the deficit, be concerned about those tax cuts for the uber wealthy.
I do think that there is, I saw there was a Washington Post headline that said that, the American Rescue Plan would, quote, shower money on people. And there was some concern about that from, some liberals, like, they're saying, they're just showering money, like, where are you getting the money from? This seems almost like a right-wing framing. But I do think that there's a difference in how people understand direct payments versus tax cuts. And that can be a good thing for liberals. Like, I think that people feel that direct payments are an actual benefit they're getting, whereas tax cuts feel more like a discount. It's money that doesn't have to be paid. And so I think that is why, the American Rescue Plan is good and will be good for Democrats, because, as Douglas said, people like getting free money. I don't think people are going to turn that down. But I also think that explains why, for some conservative and Republican voters, they don't see tax cuts for the wealthy as being sort of spending in the same way, even though it obviously increases the federal deficit. It doesn't feel like you're giving money. It just feels like you're not taking money away. And so I think that that understanding of how people view and experience tax cuts versus direct payments is very interesting and important to keep in mind.
What's the difference between for tax-paying American? What's the difference between a direct payment that goes into their pocket and a tax cut for the wealthy? If you're a tax-paying citizen, isn't getting $1,400 of that money back the same thing as a tax cut? Ultimately, foregone revenue, it's the same thing. Foregone revenue is basically the same thing. This is your taxpayer dollars. This is the money that's going back into your pocket. It's your taxpayer dollars. Do you want the cost of the American recovery to fall on the shoulders of everyday Americans, or do you want it to fall on the shoulders of the wealthy class and the corporations in the United States? That's really what it comes down.
Yeah, I mean, people are, concerned about how these payments will increase the deficit, but one way you can keep the deficit down would be to tax the wealthy at higher rates.
Well, who's concerned about the deficit right now? Because I guarantee you that the people receiving these checks and these benefits, whatever they may be, whether it be for their health care or their mortgage or their rent or for their children, aren't the ones who are necessarily concerning themselves with the deficit on a daily basis. That's what I always find so interesting about all of this. These are not people who are checking to see where we are in terms of the deficit.
Yeah, you're right. Everyday Americans do not care. This is fake. This is faux outrage that's propagated by the political conservative establishment, meant to be a bad faith opposition to what is a very broadly popular bill that's going to do a lot of good for people. And it's so bad faith, and it's an endless cycle. And if you want to talk about the bill, I mean, it's called the American Rescue Plan. If you'll just pay attention to Democratic presidents who take over from Republican presidents and how they always have to kick off their presidency with some sort of rescue or stimulus or rehabilitation of the economy, that's for a reason. And that's bad faith outrage from the right, in my opinion. But very good point, Peter.
Yeah. It will also be interesting to see, for us to have this conversation and, come June, July of this summer, even sooner, when, once people have some of this money, once they are starting to see some of the benefits of this, people are getting the checks that do not have President Biden's name on them and what they're doing with them. And of course, more people will be vaccinated by then. I really don't know if we're going to be sitting around talking about, about any contentious aspect to, what just got passed. I think we've moved on to many other, more partisan things.
Yeah, I did find it very interesting that there were Republican members of Congress on Twitter who were, promoting the good things about the bill, like, oh, this will give money to small businesses, will give money to unemployed people, despite the fact that they had voted against the bill, and now they were kind of taking credit for it. And like, there's a way that you can say, okay, well, I disagree with it, but I still want to highlight, the benefits. But like, if you're happy that it's benefiting people, why didn't you just vote for it? As Alex says, it seems like the reason people opposed it was more out of a sense of political loyalty or a desire to deny Democrats a political victory than a substantive objection to what was actually in the bill.
Yeah.
I
mean, like I said, I'm going to be instantly affected by this bill in countless ways. One I even failed to mention when I first started speaking earlier was that I have a chronic illness. I have Crohn's disease, and prior to PCIP, which is a pre-existing conditions insurance plan, which was the predecessor to the ACA, Obamacare, I couldn't get an insurance company to take my check to insure me. I have Crohn's disease, right? I'm gonna live, but it was existing condition. Ever since then, I have, had to pay a pretty high amount of money per month, even under the ACA. And yesterday I was at a clinic with a bunch of people who were all chronically ill. I think most of them had cancer. And I was just doing some routine maintenance. And I'm thinking to myself, and I'm also reading on my phone about the bill, that all of these people, all of them are going to be impacted by this in some way that is beneficial. And it is impossible to argue against that at this particular point in time.
Health insurance premiums are set to drop by 80% for people. Enrollment has reopened for the Affordable Care Act, so people can get back onto a healthcare plan by May of this year. I think that's all like a moral imperative that this bill accomplishes, and I think it's hard. It's amazing that there's such, I'm really happy that you're going to be positively impacted by it. And I think you're right, that there's a lot of people that are going to be impacted in a positive way. So come June, July, and President Biden gave a speech, directed address to the nation last night where he's talking about, I'm hoping that by July that we're having cookouts together and celebrating the 4th of July. It's going to be hard to chalk this up as any kind of a loss, because it's leadership. It's long needed leadership and hope. It's a public health. It's dealing with public health through hope as a strategy, which I just think is much needed right now after we're now a year as of yesterday into the pandemic.
Right.
Yeah.
Some interesting comments here I just want to address. I was asking, what's your take on this? Please be respectful. And, Gary was saying problems that too many that don't work by choice are getting these free handouts. So that's interesting. And it's something that I believe President Clinton, wouldn't even be able to pass, or Obama. And this is suddenly, maybe the time where people are in the most need and it's getting pushed through. Are there adverse effects? We already know that in some cases, right, workers were getting paid more to not go in even. And I know this from talking with restaurant owners too, that some of their employees, were choosing to not come in because they're making more money in certain states and certain areas to not go to work. Is this something that's going to have this impact?
It seems like it is a good thing that restaurant workers are not going into work during a pandemic. Like, I strongly believe that certainly during the pandemic, it made the most sense to pay people to not work, to pay people to stay home, because any time that people had to go to work, they were at risk of getting the disease or of spreading it. More broadly, is there a concern that, being generous to people who are out of work or, on welfare will discourage work? I mean, it's not something that keeps me up at night. I feel like most people who are unemployed would like to be employed. You don't really have cases where people are like quitting their jobs as long as they are, reasonably good jobs, and then like get rich off of welfare because they don't want to work. Like people find meaning and dignity and like social connections through work. Generally, people who are on welfare want to work, I think. It can be difficult to find jobs, and especially good jobs, jobs that pay a living wage, that have benefits, and that treat people fairly. If there is a job that is paying you so little that requires you to, come in on short notice, part time, that will not give you like a full time position because they want you, this just in time scheduling where it's like you can work for a large employer, you can be in the service industry, and they're not going to tell you when you're supposed to come in. They will just tell you the day before, okay, we need you on the floor. They will make sure that you're not working 40 hours a week because they don't want to have to pay you benefits. Or you will be, increasingly turning to gig work where you're not actually an employee. You're just an independent contractor. And like, I think people struggle with the way that a lot of jobs in the US are no longer stable. And so if people find it difficult to like be an Uber driver or to work at Walmart or Starbucks where they don't know when they need to go in and they can't commit to coming in whenever the boss needs them to because, they also have to watch their children. Like, it just seems to me that the biggest issue with why people are not working is because there are not enough good, stable jobs out there. It's not like people are turning down jobs where they could make a good living and they could like have job stability in order to be on welfare. Like if people are unable to work, if they're not able to accept what's being offered, that seems like more of a commentary on the kinds of jobs that they're being offered than it is this idea that they don't want to work.
I think it was also, a discussion of like certain people who did take advantage of that era during COVID. And I think far more people, particularly in the restaurant and service industry, bar industries, have been negatively impacted long term. I noticed in the comments a chef named Michelle talking about how she's still struggling to get a job. In a lot of the areas, cities, and states where COVID has more it's impacted the community more than others, where perhaps even the mayors or governors were more vigilant, and the restaurants were shut down either for indoor or entirely on and off, where these people kept losing their job. They had no consistency with work. That's something that's impacted them. And a lot of restaurants where I live in Los Angeles that are the really cool, just provide a lot of community mom and pop style restaurants, they're gone. They are never going to reopen. And so you've got chefs and waiters and bartenders, people who might do this on the side, or this might be their profession. This is what they live for, and they're experts at that. They can no longer work in this neighborhood for the foreseeable future until something else comes along. So I just feel like those types of people far outweigh anyone who's like, living on the government dole, Yeah.
And that's just more, and I agree with you. And it's also just more bad faith argument for not helping people, and it's propagated by a media establishment on the right and a political class on the right for not giving aid to people. It's actually outrageous. You want to talk about moral depravity? Let's talk about how we ask people to work full time at a below the poverty line because wage increases haven't happened in the United States in 12 years, but cost of living has gone up. The cost of rent has gone up. People have student loans, they've got car payments, and somebody working full time, minimum wage, is making $15,000 a year.
And if you are, a waiter, you're not even making minimum wage. In so many states, They
exactly.
pay you less than minimum wage, and they say you'll make it up in tips.
And you're asking them to put their lives on the line in a global pandemic and be at work. So I'm sorry, I have a hard time buying that there's a bunch of people who are like taking advantage of the government's government handout and staying home on $300 or whatever the unemployment benefits are. I mean, why don't we talk about wage increases and paying people livable wages, and then talk about paying them extra for putting their lives on the line because they're service workers who are being asked to work during a global pandemic if they are lucky enough to be a part of an establishment or a company or a restaurant or whatever, what have you, that is still open because it hasn't shut down for good permanently. You know, if this pandemic had been handled with any modicum of aptitude from the very beginning, then we wouldn't have had to be here. This was a result of failed leadership from the very outset of the pandemic. We shouldn't have even have to be a year into this and have this many closures. We should have done hard closures in the beginning and gone back to work, and much like New Zealand, but we did it. And that failed leadership has a cost, and I have a hard time believing that cost is the fault of a couple of workers, exceptions to the rule, who are somehow making more money on unemployment than they are by getting back to work. I just think that's bad faith, more bad faith argument.
Yeah, and I mean, I can understand, you know, I think that sort of argument against welfare or, you know, stimulus payments or direct payments, when it comes from sort of the political class or, you know, the right-wing media, I agree with you that it is very much bad faith. You know, I don't necessarily think that like individual conservative voters who feel that way are operating in bad faith. I think they genuinely worry about this idea of, you know, adverse moral effects. You know, will it disincentivize people? So again, I wouldn't sort of blame individual voters necessarily. I just think that is wrong. And I think that, you know, the idea that people are struggling and we shouldn't help them, I find that to be just difficult to understand on like a moral basis. Like, there are people who can't get good jobs and who might be turning down jobs that, you know, are very bad, but that's not necessarily an immoral thing. And the fact that you have insane wealth and income disparities, I don't know how you can say that, you know, someone who is not working and receiving $300 a week or $300 every 2 weeks is gaming the system. At the same time, you have someone like Jeff Bezos who has made hundreds of billions of dollars, you know, over the course of the pandemic. So it's not really a question even of whether, you know, there are people who are working hard and having their money redistributed to people who are not working at all. I mean, you know, I can understand the argument that you should reward success, and that if people are, you know, creating companies or working hard, then, you know, not everyone should necessarily be paid the exact same amount. But I'm not sure that it makes sense to have people, just because you start a company, even if it is, you know, a good company, that you should be able to make millions or billions of dollars doing nothing during the course of a pandemic and having your wealth go up, and that is somehow more morally justifiable than people who are out of work being paid a few $100s. You know, it doesn't seem to me that it's really an issue of scarcity where you need to take money away from people who are working hard and give it to those who are unfortunate and have not been able to get a decent job. It feels like there is a large group of very, very wealthy people who largely make money through investments, in businesses and equity, as opposed to hard work, who have an insane amount of money, and you can take that money and give it to the people who are, currently unable to afford healthcare or childcare or food.
Douglas, sorry, I muted you because
I think you're muted.
Go ahead.
Okay, my wild dog. I apologize. Yeah, I think that the fact that we're even discussing this is kind of an interesting point, in that the narrative has been defined around these people who are taking from the system. That is, those people are people that we all might know or know of. They're tangible, right? They're restaurant workers. They're people that we might have in our own lives. So it's very easy for the average person to wrap their head around that and say, well, that's a problem with the system. Now, it's very difficult. You were Peter, you were rattling off some numbers for Amazon and for Jeff Bezos. That and then also just kind of the top 0.0001% of people who are making millions just off of their investments during the pandemic. That is almost impossible for most people to even understand, because it is not part of daily life. It is so ephemeral, and so therefore they're looking around going, well, what can I blame? And then it's very easy for someone who wants to define the narrative, who perhaps is a very partisan media person, to say, well, let's pick the easiest, lowest common denominator to blame, and therefore that is what the story then becomes. And now we're talking about it, and that's great, but I do think we need to point that out, that it is easy to point out some restaurant workers who are not working, because it's easier for them to make several $100s a week than it is for us to talk about the billions of dollars made by people who really don't work, who are living off of all of their investments. That's just, I almost can't even fathom it.
Yeah, I mean, it's so alien to what most people know about. I mean, not even that. I believe that a majority of households in the U.S. don't own any investments, and a lot of the ones that do own investments have like 401ks, where you have low fee kind of broad index funds where the money goes up a little bit every year, and you can eventually have like a nest egg. But you then have sort of a whole class of like financial people who make insane amounts of money by betting on stocks, and by betting on stocks and then doing financial engineering in ways that end up benefiting those stocks. And it's not like people are making lots of money even though they're not really working that hard. You can say that, well, by investing in stocks, you are helping the market, you're increasing liquidity, but like, I don't know if that is worth millions or billions of dollars for individual people. If you are a stock trader or a professional investor, or you inherit a lot of money and then you can put it in the stock market, maybe that is worth something, but I don't know if it's worth, the amount of money that people are making, if it's really harder or more socially beneficial than people who are working at a restaurant. So that's just, I feel like, as you were saying, Douglas, by focusing on working class people who are able to quote unquote take advantage of the system by not working and getting a few $100s a month, if you're really concerned about the way that the economy is structured, you should be focused on the people who are barely working and making millions of dollars. Like
hundreds of millions.
The idea that wealth is correlated to hard work, it may be true for a section of society, but it is not true overall. And it is absolutely not true when you get to like the top strata. I did sort of the GameStop thing a few weeks ago, where I, invested some of my like just, gambling money basically on GameStop. and I was able to get it when it was relatively low and sell it when it was relatively high. And I made, like $2,000 for doing nothing. And like, that's not money that, I deserve. And, you have hedge funds that do that or do the opposite, where they buy it when it's high and they sell it when it's high through shorting and then buy it when it's low and pocket the difference. And, they're making millions or tens of millions. And it's like, what are they doing to deserve that money? So,
I mean, I think you bring about an interesting point in that it's easier than ever at this point for retail investors, average Joes like me to start, building a portfolio and getting into the game here. I mean, the GameStop phenomenon with Robinhood, where anyone can jump in and stocks can go viral, is clearly a watershed moment. And I don't think it's an accident that it happened during this pandemic, when people, had a lot of insecurity and instability, where there's a lot of, I think, time on people's hands as well, and where this technology has arisen. And I think we are seeing that the markets are divorced from the actual worth and reality of, the stocks themselves and the companies themselves. And that's something that certainly worrisome. People talk about bubbles. We've seen stocks come down, particularly in tech over the last week or so, to kind of readjust. But definitely some interesting things going on in the markets. And
Peter, the markets are the highest they've ever been, right? They hit record highs. Companies like Amazon are making record profits. Jeff Bezos making hundreds of millions of dollars during the global pandemic, but 50% of Americans live beneath the poverty line. So like the stock market is not an indicator of the strength or health of the economy, and people making $300 unemployment checks is not really the problem. You want to see what the problem is. Go follow the money.
And it's not even like retail investors that are the problem. People who are making a few thousand or tens of thousands of dollars. It's like there is a whole, group of companies, class of people that the only thing they do is manipulate markets, and they make millions of dollars. And, like it takes skill to manipulate markets. It's not like it's worthless, but I just don't think it should be rewarded at such a high rate when then you look at people who are doing real work who can't even make ends meet.
Right. Good points, guys. We have to wrap. We're approaching 1 hour now. Very cool to see this discussion in the comments as well going on. I appreciate everyone being respectful. We really value your opinion. There's lots of valid perspectives here, and I appreciate everyone who's been contributing, their personal story during the pandemic here and how this bill may impact them and their view on it. That's really cool to see. And I like breaking this fourth wall and having some engagement with the audience here. I appreciate you all here up on screen with me as well. Any final thoughts? I guess I'll allow you to each maybe make a closing statement. This is obviously the big headline of the day. Would love to reconvene this group and invite others on to chat headlines too down the road here. But any final words?
Yeah. This piece of legislation is going to have a profound impact, but it was passed through something called budget reconciliation in the Senate, which is one of the only times the Senate is able to pass a piece of legislation through a simple majority vote. Everything else is going to require a 60-vote supermajority. Democrats are evenly tied with Republicans in the Senate. There are 50 Democrats, 50 Republicans. Kamala Harris, vice president, is the tie-breaking vote in the Senate. And Democrats in the Senate represent 40 million more Americans than Republicans do, and yet a supermajority is required to pass any other legislation in the Senate. So voting rights, a minimum wage increase, climate change, labor, this PRO Act that was passed in the House, any kind of major legislation that you want done for the American people, it's gonna die in the United States Senate unless you end the filibuster. So if you care about progress on those things and you think that this was a good first step with this piece of legislation, I would definitely encourage that you find out where your senator sits on the filibuster. I'm looking at you, Joe Manchin, Kyrsten Sinema, and Dianne Feinstein here in California. And that's my final take.
I think that's a very good point that Alex makes. It seems unfair that you can win elections and have a majority, a very small majority, but still a majority, and then not be able to pass legislation. Like in the Senate, it requires a 60 vote majority. You need 60 votes to get anything passed, 60 out of 100. And that is not like something that is in the Constitution. It's not like the Senate was set up to require 60 votes. But now, because of, the way that the filibuster was developed over the years and the way that it has been abused over the past few decades, where, originally it was supposed to be, okay, the Senate, we want to promote debate, so anyone can speak for as long as they want, make sure that everyone is heard before you vote on legislation, which, fine, that kind of makes sense. But at this point, it's been abused to the point where, you can say, oh, well, I'm going to threaten to vote on every single piece of legislation. I'm going to threaten to speak for as long as possible on any piece of legislation. Like, that is clearly not what the filibuster was meant to do. And as a result, you've basically changed the rules to require, in effect, 60 votes to get anything passed, which was never the intent of the Senate. And so it does seem like that is something that should probably be repealed, because it's been abused to basically add this extra rule that was never the intent of the founders or the Senate for most of its existence.
The framers actually consciously rejected the filibuster. And if you want to talk about the intent of the filibuster, it actually has its roots in the Jim Crow South and was used primarily, the beginnings of it were to prevent civil rights legislation, and then have become a tool by the right, basically Mitch McConnell, since Obama's presidency, to obstruct progress by Democrats.
Hey, Alexandra?
Yeah.
Alex?
Yeah.
Can you bring the dog in? Oh, sorry. They want to see him. Sorry, I'm interrupting. I'm seeing a note here from Peter. Look, my contribution to that conversation is there's a great article by David Frum in The Atlantic from a couple of weeks ago. I think what would be a nice layman's explanation as to why the filibuster is bad just generally, and why the Senate has been established in a way that is anti-democratic. But my little piece of what I would like to say is that if you're at all for a lot of people I know are all looking for to get back to some normality. A lot of people I know, I'll go back to my music roots, people wanting to get back to concerts, to communing around, live events. I work for a lot of live events companies. If you want that, we're so close, regardless of whatever your state leader or your city leader is saying. Keep wearing a mask, and when it's your chance, get vaccinated. I know some people's states and cities, their websites are a little hard to navigate, but you just got to stay on it, and you got to stay diligent, because if you want to go to that concert, you want to support that artist, because these artists are ready to play and they are suffering as well. If you want to get back to that music festival, you want to go to Coachella, wear a mask and get vaccinated. And this is who's making all the noise on my end. I apologize.
Oh.
Adorable. Thanks for that puppy cameo. I think we'll end on that, guys. I really appreciate everyone's time for jumping in here. This is a fun format. I would love to play around with this more. We're just kind of experimenting here. Really appreciate everyone who contributed their opinion in the comments again, respectfully, and no right or wrong answers here. Just very cool to see this debate happening. And thanks for the puppy cameo. I was wondering if we could get him on screen. What's his or her name?
He's a very intelligent dog. He might have his own show one day, but right now he's got a lot of energy.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Peter, Alex, Douglas. Really appreciate your time today, and hope to see you guys here back in dialogue sometime soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers. Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining us out there.
Bye.